Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Dulce Valencia. I am the Senior Manager of Entertainment Engagement at Define American. We are an organization that empowers diverse and nuanced storytelling about immigrant experiences through our research, our partnerships, and our storyteller engagement. We were founded in 2011 by Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and Tony-nominated producer, Jose Antonio Vargas. And we are excited to be here. This is our second time at ATX, and we just have a wonderful time. We love the team here, and I'm very excited to bring in our panelists. But before that, we're gonna play just a little intro video about Define American. That was just a small snippet of the work we do. That was specifically the Define American Immigrant Representation Scale, which is a storytelling tool meant to help creatives at the beginning of the creative process tell more authentic and nuanced immigrant stories. And let me just, a little bit of housekeeping. We're gonna leave the last 15 minutes for audience Q&A, so please prepare your questions. And our panelists, can we give it a warm applause, because they're incredible. We have Hua Shande from The Sympathizer, Brian T. from Expats, and last but not least, Rafael Agustin, writer of Jane the Virgin. Thank you all so much for being here. We're just gonna go ahead and get started. The first question, and it's a bit broad, so bear with me, but we're here to talk about authentic immigrant storytelling. To you, as actors, as writers, what does that mean when we say authentic immigrant storytelling?
Want me to start?
You're the writer, so.
Okay, so first, I want to appreciate being invited on this panel with these gorgeous men. Invite other writers so we can so I can feel more at home. To me, it's about being able to see people as human beings. It's that plain and simple. When I came on Jane the Virgin, we didn't shy away from tackling immigration and undocumented American storylines. But Alba, the abuela, who was undocumented in the show, I was more focused on making her a complete human being. I didn't like that she was so almost like one note a lot of the times, because she was so angry and prudish. So my entire purpose was to turn her up, because that's how my abuelita is. She comes from a long generation of Latin American women who don't start living their lives until their husbands die, unfortunately. So I wanted that to be Alba. I wanted to have her be like how Stella got her groove back in the seasons that I wrote, and we did. So when you asked that question, I actually didn't focus on the political part of it. I focused on the human part of it. And then, not to spoil it for anyone, but in my episode, the grandmother discovers masturbation. And to me, that feels human. So yeah, that's how I tackle immigration stories, through masturbation. Go on. Next question.
Perfect.
To add to Rafael's words, I think it's about that authentic immigrant story is about being authentic, and I think you spoke so highly of it. I think so many times people try to write stories that seem very tropey or stereotypical in that sense, and it becomes this kind of continuation of, well, that is what that is. But when you come from an authentic place, like Rafael does, to talk and write about a particular grandmother that he's actually experienced right through these particular characters, is what I think we're all trying to do as far as storytellers are concerned.
Yeah, about authentic immigrant stories, I mean, The Sympathizer does have a masturbation scene. So we really, yeah.
Wait, hold on. I fucked the squid is my favorite line of television from your show.
It was important to round out my character. But no, I guess, to answer your question, Dulce, especially in relation to the Vietnam War and the trauma and the aftermath of the people that suffered that, a lot of the times when we think about that conflict, it's always been from the American perspective. It's always been very Western centric, and I'm actually Australian, so I got a dose of a double sort of perspective in terms of what that war was like from the American perspective, from watching shows on from films and TV of Hollywood, and then the Australian perspective as well. And it was always from the view of the soldiers that were on the ground fighting the war, and what the traumas and the loss of friendships and mateship and all that sort of stuff. But it was never really told from the point of view of the people who were living there, the Vietnamese people. And so I think when you try and approach telling these sort of stories in that way, and you forget about the actual other side of the people who are also humans that suffered this war just as much as, people from America or Australia, it gets lost. And then these tropes and these stereotypes start to form that apparently a certain group of people are only there to be saved and can't save themselves and are relegated to just two-dimensional beings. And then so in doing The Sympathizer, we were able to give these Vietnamese perspectives that have never been really heard from before, reality. They were given beliefs. They were given, different ideologies. I mean, they even fought amongst themselves. It's not like they were just a monolith of people with, with single ideas. So I think doing shows like The Sympathizer and having people continue portraying, immigrants in ways that are just as complex and three-dimensional as the stories that we're so used to seeing is important to shape our narratives and our views of what other people experience as well in real life. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You mentioned stereotypes, and all three of you, I think, are wonderful representations of characters and stories that do move away from stereotypes and embrace the humanity. But you all have also been working in Hollywood for a while, and sorry, that wasn't an ageist joke. I'm so sorry.
Wow, we feel a little old over here, but that's okay.
I am so sorry.
It's okay.
You've had a wonderful career in Hollywood, and I'm wondering, over the course of the career, have you ever been put in a position where you either had to, you were asked to play into a stereotype, whether with your acting or your writing, and if so, how did you handle that?
Gosh, let's start. The answer is yes. I mean, I will age myself. I've been doing this for 25 plus years just as an actor. And towards the beginning of my career, there were for sure stereotypes and trope roles that were the only things that were out there. We're all gunning for North Korean soldier in Japanese businessman number 2. And that was it. That was the bar that we were allowed to play.
And if you got that, you'd have a career.
That was That was the win. Yeah. And it formed kind of this isolation factor, because it felt a bit like, what is that movie where like there can only be one?
Highlander.
The Highlander effect.
Well, now we're really aging ourselves. Highlander, yes.
But it was hard to build a community because the opportunities were so few and far between, and they were these tropes and stereotypes that the community couldn't really build and really stand on particular stories. And so if you wanted to pursue this craft in your career, especially in the film and television business, you had to take what was offered to you. And then hopefully someday that things would expand and you uplift your worth as an artist to be able to do other things that aren't so stereotypical. But I think now the industry has definitely expanded and opened up a little bit more to the point where you have Gua playing like the lead role in a giant television series, which is completely unprecedented for me and something to absolutely applaud. So congratulations.
Oh, thanks, Brian. But also, I wouldn't be here, and I wouldn't have been given this opportunity if it wasn't for so many actors before me who have really tried to push that boundary. Because there have been many people before me who could, absolutely, if they were given the opportunity to do what so many of the Vietnamese cast were able to do in this show, but they just weren't afforded that opportunity. So people like Brian were leading the way, and Raphael writing these stories. We're trying to push that in Hollywood for a long time.
The Drift King. It's funny, as a writer, I've sold 4 TV shows since Jane the Virgin. I haven't gotten them to series, but that's just like the nature of the business. But a lot of producers, a lot of networks reach out to me to develop some shows, and a lot of times, this happened to me 2 weeks ago, I understand why they reach out to me. Like, I understand like geographically where the show's placed or the communities that it's addressing, but a lot of times I feel I have to tell them, this is another white savior story, and we don't need those stories. That's why I admire the work from The Sympathizer, that you flip the script on people. So I have to tell folks, like, unless you want to show like how the white savior sometimes fucks up, like, I'll tell that story, but I don't want to tell that other. We've seen it for so long already.
Brian, I want to go to you because you mentioned, that to have a career, you had to take on these roles that played into stereotypes in the hope that something would come of it. And expats, that character is fully dimensional. The show grapples so many important themes: grief, being in a foreign culture, navigating something that's unknown. And your character is, I think, such a gift of a role. Can you talk about what it was like for you to play a character like Clark and to do a show like Expats? And what do you think it contributes to the conversation around expats and global mobility?
Yeah, I would say that this is the first role in my career I've been able to play a fully three-dimensional character with the depth that he had to go to. I think, especially in a stage and platform such as this, play on a Nicole Kidman, which is kind of the first for myself, obviously, and a lot for Asian America and even any kind of ethnic minority background to play at that caliber. So for me, it was definitely a gift, but I felt like it was a testament to the creatives. It was a testament to Yu Wang, who took this particular book, and the characters were all Caucasian, and she flipped it and tried to tell a different story with the same themes from the intentions of the book, yet come from a perspective of immigrants, of diversity, and that we're not a monolith in that sense, and telling true, authentic stories with that background and that rigor and that talent. And I think she created a character that was real. And for myself, Clark is probably the most relatable character of my life. Like, we were talking backstage where we grew up. Like, I grew up in a suburb just outside of Los Angeles called Hudson Heights, and it was this utopia. And it was, if it was 30% Caucasian, it was 30% Hispanic, right? It was like 20% Asian, 20% African American. And it was this utopia for myself growing up. And I didn't quite know the box I had to live in the industry until I actually started acting. And they're like, wait a second, no, that utopia is fine for you, and that's your life, and that's your kind of lived authenticity. But in the stories that we want to tell, you're placed in this box. And Expats was the first story that I was like, whoa, this is different, right? And of course, I had done AC's Legend of Continental Men, and don't get me wrong, that was a very pivotal character and a pivotal, I guess, transition into my career. But Clark in Expats was another dimension. The completely elevated craft that I feel, as far as we all try to pursue it, hopefully at some point are a part of. And it's, again, a testament, I think, to changing the times, and especially people behind the camera creating these authentic stories.
And Hua, Changing of the Times, Sympathizer, an incredible show. Like you said, it flips the switch. You see the perspective of the Vietnam War through actual Vietnamese people. And your character in particular, it's such a complex one. Half French, half Vietnamese, is a communist spy, is forced to deal with his allegiance, coming to a new country. How did, if you did, draw from your own personal experiences to portray this character? And what was most exciting about the character or more challenging?
It was perfect because I am a half French, half Vietnamese spy. So they just found me waiting along.
Breaking news.
Perfect casting. It was just who I was. It was authentically me. Randomly. I mean, I'm Australian and I'm Vietnamese, and I live in, just on the other side of the planet. So, to be given this opportunity to literally play a role that I never thought I'd ever be given the opportunity to has been just, beyond my wildest dreams. But I think what really stuck with me when I read this book is, for those of you who've read the book, it's a journey, apart from being a spy and playing the allegiances and the double sides and all that sort of stuff. It's really a journey about finding identity. It's a journey about figuring out what parts of you and what your beliefs really have been formulated by in terms of the societies that you've been brought up in. And, I was a Vietnamese kid living in Australia. I didn't have, I had few Asian friends, if Vietnamese friends at that. And so I never really felt like that was really who I was. My parents spoke to me in Vietnamese, but I never really reciprocated it because in Australia, I just didn't have the need to speak Vietnamese. So for a long time, I kind of shunned that part of my identity, if you want to call it that. And then culturally, I had a lot of friends who were very into their sports. We have a game in Australia called the Australian Rules Football. It's our football, but it's very different from your NFL. But that's what I gravitated towards because that's what my friends were playing. And for me, that was who I thought I was because culturally, that's where I was being brought up in. And so for a long time as a kid, I felt like I was towing this line between I'm Australian, but I didn't look it, but then I'm culturally Vietnamese, but I didn't feel it. And that inherently is what is at the core of this character. And having read that, I felt a huge alignment in terms of what I could bring to this character authentically. And then being the spy and layering all those beliefs and ideologies was just inherently what we all have to deal with as people living in different societies. And once you put all those things together, you start playing a human being on TV as opposed to boxing yourself into what these types have to be when you think of certain things like, spy, double agent, wielding a gun. It's like those things don't really matter. It's who's the human underneath it all. And that's really what I really tried to lean into.
I love that. Who's the human underneath it all? Rafa, let's go to Jane the Virgin because that show was full of characters that I thought represented the humanity above everything else. And you yourself have spoken, and you wrote a book, Illegally Yours, which if y'all haven't read it, please read it. It's a wonderful book where you detail your experiences as an undocumented immigrant, and which is something that you tackled in Jane the Virgin, but you also tackle it in a really beautiful way using comedy. So can you talk about your choice, one, to be so open about your undocumented experiences and using that in the shows and stories you've told, and also how you bring comedy into all of it?
Damn, that's heavy. I was just actually, I'm gonna take a quick second because I don't think we realize how groundbreaking it is what these two have achieved to be able to play toe-to-toe with Robert Downey Jr. and Nicole Kidman. That is unbelievable. Because if you think about the original Beverly Hills Cop, Eddie Murphy couldn't even have a love interest with the white woman. The love interest of that movie is with the side character. That's how far we've come. This is incredible. So I just want to bow down to both of y'all. That's unbelievable. Now, about me. Enough about you. Let's talk about me. Yes, I grew up undocumented in this country, and the way I found out was very interesting because I grew up in San Gabriel Valley. Like, we literally grew up in the same neighborhood in California, and I was like the class president, the prom king, the top 10% of my class. I'm telling you, bro. We're gonna have... Are we best friends? Yeah. Then this part you didn't get. Then I applied to get my driver's license. I applied to go to college and discovered I was undocumented. My parents didn't tell me. Like, my mom always wanted to protect me from that harsh reality. And when I asked her why, she said, and I stole this and put it in the book. She said, your dad and I didn't want you to grow up feeling different because dreams should not have borders. And that always stayed with me. So you're asking me why the comedy of it all? It's because I've seen, okay, let's go back to Define American. Define American and the Norman Lear Center did a study a few years back that was so powerful that showed that undocumented characters on TV commit more crimes than their real life counterparts, are less educated than their real life counterparts, and own less businesses than their real life counterparts. That really blew my mind because we're not represented as human beings. And that's what I wanted to do with my work, with my writing, and with the book. We're just people. Like, you know, it just so happened that we don't have that piece of paper that says otherwise. But I think that's why I did it, and I did it with comedy because I read some other memoirs about immigrants and undocumented Americans that were so sad. And I was like, it's my experience and I don't even want to read this. This is like so traumatizing. So I was like, how do I make it a comedy to make it accessible so that then maybe I can change some hearts and minds? One of the best things that the creator of Jane the Virgin told me, Jenny Snyder-Urban, she told me is people will ignore topics and issues, but people won't ignore other people. And that's why it breaks down to what we were all saying here. Like, if we could just be seen as human, it's game over. Because then how do you justify your racism? How do you justify your prejudice against us if we're just like you?
Yeah. Oh, love that. Yeah.
And thank you for bringing it back.
Tell that to my mom.
Thank you for bringing it back to the research. It's unfortunate because since that study, we've released another study and criminality with immigration actually went up. Now it's 40% of all immigrant characters on screen are associated with a crime, which is just not on par with reality. But on the upside of research, we study something called parasocial contact theory. And what that is that audiences develop an imaginary relationship and friendship with the characters that they're watching. And specifically, if audiences are watching characters who they don't have real world experiences with, or groups like immigrants, they tend to be shifted to be more accepting of them. And y'all have played or written for characters that are, in my opinion, complex and wonderful. Knowing the impact that television and your roles can have on audiences, one, what do you hope that audiences will take from the characters you've played? And two, knowing that, what kind of roles do you hope to play in the future and that Hollywood should just greenlight and make accessible?
I'll start with Chicago Med because I did that for the last, 8 seasons, and countless times over Asian American mothers and fathers say, well, thank you for what you did. Like, my son sees himself on the television weekly. And what's interesting about that show is that we never really delved deep into the characters, like his immigration story, or his backstory in that sense, to really fully flesh it out, because that's just not the way some of these television dramas could be. But I think just having that visual asset on a weekly basis to be a very positive figure, to be a pseudo hero, a doctor saving lives, is, I think, an asset, especially towards the ones that really can't see themselves or can't identify themselves. And with the subject matter that you're talking about, I think it is that really, it is that seeing yourself, whether it's visual or whether it's part of the story. I think all of it helps in a tremendous way. When I was growing up, I never saw myself. My heroes were like Mr. T, right? Because I was like, he's badass. But it was that, right? I never really saw myself until Bruce Lee, and that was like a glimpse of him. And I think in this generation that we're all living and existing in now, we can just see ourselves, right, through this medium that is so really off, right? And moves out these changes political systems. It's massive, especially the media turning on to social media and all this other stuff. I think more and more people can find themselves in so many different outlets. And it's up to us to really tell those particular stories in an authentic way. And when I say authentic, I also feel like there is this wonderful authenticity to the immigrant story. But I also want to identify that assimilating isn't necessarily a bad thing. And I say that in the sense of your parents wanted you to assimilate, because there are immigrants coming to the States and really want you to be a part of this Americana. And I think you growing up in Australia with your Vietnamese background and all this other stuff, playing Australian football is your sense of assimilation, because that's all you knew, yeah? That was your life, and that is your truth, and that is your life experience and your story. Mine is my own. So I think what I want to preface this is by saying is like, tell your stories, tell them truthfully and authentically, no matter what that is. and people will find themselves within you. Love that. Love that.
Yeah.
I think that just speaks to the point of representation. Like, you know, ultimately, you know, we shouldn't have to feel like we need to purport certain people to be able to relate to, you know, their humanity, this, that, and the other. But truthfully, if we get used to seeing an idea of a person being portrayed in a certain way, we start forming beliefs that these certain peoples or groups of peoples are that, because we haven't seen anything else. So that's why it's important to not only have a diverse mix of people on screen that we can also relate to, but it also affects other people and how they see those people in the real world. Do you know what I mean? Because that's the problem with stereotypes, is that we start, not only does the industry box us, but then we start boxing ourselves, and then people box us for us, and then that doesn't really help us. So yeah, it's all relating to being a human.
That was deep. No, I was like, wait, hold on. Okay, did I just box myself? Okay, so not to get too heady, because I wanted to keep it light, but now you got me like super deep right here. In academia, there's something called symbolic annihilation. And I don't know if you've ever heard this term. It blew my mind when I heard it a few years back. That's when a group of people are excluded or underrepresented in mass media. And that's kind of what all of our work is. We're fighting symbolic annihilation, because at best, at very best, is what Brian said earlier, that we grew up not seeing ourselves represented on TV, so we don't feel like we're part of the fabric of this nation. That's at best. But at worst, symbolic annihilation could lead to what happened in El Paso, when someone killed innocent Americans because he saw them as invaders or as illegals because of the media that they're consuming. So that's really at the core of why representation matters, because of the symbolic annihilation that we're trying to fight.
Thank you for bringing that up. And I want to.
But I write comedy, by the way. Yeah.
He's a comedy writer, and he's very funny. I want to stick to the topic of representation. You all mentioned it. This is something I really like asking, but when was the first time you felt like you saw yourself represented? And it's a TV festival, so I'm going to say TV. Before I throw it to you all, Rafa, I want to say Jane the Virgin was the first time I saw myself represented. Like the character of Jane Gloriana Villanueva, that was so important to me growing up.
She told me, she was like, I was like 2 years old sitting with my grandmother. I was like, damn, all right.
Tampoco. But so thank you for that, and I will throw it to you.
You know, honestly, this sounds crazy. It's Ricky Ricardo. It's Desi Arnaz was the first time I saw myself represented on TV, but I have to put it into context because I saw it on reruns. And because at that time, there was no one that I saw like me or my culture, my community on TV. And then many years later, I discovered that Desi Arnaz and Lucille Ball are responsible for the multicam. They're responsible for the creation of reruns. So this Latin American immigrant is literally the pioneer of television. Yeah. And that's why I was able to see him. But it took so long before I saw anyone else like him, who was on the #1 show in the United States. That's what's so crazy. Like, yeah, now we have Pedro Pascal in The Last of Us, and we have Jenna Ortega on Wednesday. But how many years did that take? When in the 50s, an immigrant from Latin America literally was inventing television. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Ricky Ricardo is my answer.
I love that.
I'm gonna date myself too, but this was a blip in the radar. There's this show called All American Girl. It was barely a season, and it was starring Margaret Cho. And it came on the scene on television, and I was like, whoa, what is this? And then I became the biggest Margaret Cho fan. She was a bit lover to say. But for me, that was it. That was actually me seeing myself, my family, on television, right? And at that time, there were only 4 stations, and there's such limited amount of content for you to watch in the context of finding yourself. And when this came onto the scene, it blew my mind. Absolutely blew it.
Damn, I can't actually, and I feel bad for saying it. It's probably because I'm just not very brushed up on TV, so I'll preface it by saying that. But don't really remember watching something where I've gone, that's me, or that's my family, especially, I guess, when you talk about, I've certainly seen other Asian families and I've seen how they've been portrayed, and there are families like mine, but I've never really felt like they were representing me, because being Vietnamese stories were always related to the Vietnam War. And it's like, I've grown past the Vietnam War. I'm a child of immigrants from the war, but it's not my life. Like, I just wanted to be a normal kid, doing normal things. And every time people spoke about being Vietnamese, it was like, oh, you're in a war. But so in that way, I don't know if I really ever have watched something that has fully represented who I was. But I guess, speaking to what you were saying earlier, Brian, in terms of being able to play your role in expats, for me, it's like, wow, I actually finally get, and it's still related to the war, but which, is what it is. But at least I got to play a role that was fully figured out, fully fleshed out, had a whole, a plethora of beliefs and different things that I could do and emotions that I could imbue and all that sort of stuff. But so that was, I guess, doing this was the first time I felt like I could play myself, as opposed to having seen something that I felt like I was watching that was myself. So yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm just gonna add, it's an interesting thing. I think it's every single one of us have our own identity, and I think when watching television or the media, I don't know if you'll ever fully find yourself, and maybe you will, and if you do, that's great. But I think we all come from different backgrounds and share different stories and have different paths, that finding that identity factor can come in the smallest of places too. And these universal themes that we all can kind of capture culturally in our existence in life. And I think if those stories are also told, that you can reach broader audiences and have other people, yes, identify themselves to you. Because I think these stories can be somewhat universal to humanity. And if you can identify to that particular humanity, I think you're doing the right thing.
Yeah, and I want to say, the fact that you haven't felt like you've seen yourself represented is also very important, because you've all mentioned it. We're not a monolith. Immigrants are not a monolith. Our founder, Jose Antonio Vargas, has said, there are 45 million immigrants living in the United States alone. That means there are 45 million different stories and different ways of being an immigrant. And I wanna move over to terms and terminology, because there's been, especially with expats, there's been a lot of talk about terminology and the term expats versus immigrant and the role privilege plays into it. So Brian, I know you were an expat, so I would love to hear your thoughts, but I really want to open it to either of you to give your thoughts on that.
I mean, expats, I feel, is an essence of a classist type of, wording, I would say. I think if you're an expat, you're traveling to a land with the preparation of understanding that you'll be gifted with the backing of a corporation or there to do work or of some sort that is elevated, I feel. I think you drop into a foreign land and you are somewhat taken care of. This is my identification of what an expat is. An immigrant is something I feel completely different. I think everyone's immigrant story is different, and you're there for whatever reason that you need to be, but it doesn't come with this sense of elevated class that I feel expats kind of innately do. And I feel like there's this differentiation that you'll see in our show, Expats. We have 3 separate particular storylines, but all in different classes. And my storyline with me and Nicole are a family of expats that came from the States because of my work. And we're all treated lavishly with what we call helpers. But what I love about our story is that Lulu identified the perspective of the helpers, right? Them coming from the Philippines as immigrants to work and to provide for their families back at home. And it's a beautiful, beautiful story, but also one that really identifies the difference between expats and immigrants. And though we're all dealing with the same kind of trauma, it's all from a different perspective. And what I love about the show is that you can relate to each one of the character's perspective, even though they come from completely different backgrounds.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to say anything?
No, that was great.
Yeah.
That was awesome. Like when it is a class thing, because when we see a group of like, let's say day laborers, you don't go, that's a group of expats right there.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
I haven't really thought too hardly on the different class factor between those two terms, to be honest, because I guess that speaks to my even just ignorance about how different people have come and settled. Yeah. I don't really have anything for that, sorry.
It's all good. It's all good. I want to, we're here talking about immigrant representation, and we've talked about the past. I want to bring us to the future. What do you hope the future in terms of immigrant representation and stories looks like? And what would you like to see?
These are the deepest questions I've had on a TV panel in my life. I'm like, here's my dissertation for this answer. You're making us sweat up here.
You're welcome.
What do we want? Like for me, it's exactly what you just stated. There's how many immigrants in the United States?
45 million.
45 million immigrants. That means there's 45 million stories, and we have yet to crack 1% of them. Yeah, there's a lot of work to be done for sure. To me, that's more authentic immigrant stories or refugees, which is actually the word that you were dealing with in your show, which is great. Yeah, I just think there's so many more stories to tell.
I agree. I feel it's what I hope and dream about, right? Years down the line. It's that we've hopefully moved the pendulum in the right direction, and slowly but surely, on an uphill battle at snail's pace, we get to a particular position where we're just telling stories, right? And that it doesn't have to be an immigrant story, right? It's just a story, because we all are immigrants at some point, at some time, especially here in the United States, and that we're just telling stories that everyone across the world, and especially here, can identify with, right? And connect to. Because we are all humans, one and the same, and living definitely different lives and perspectives, but can garner this sense of, at the very minimum, understanding. And it's that I hope to achieve at some point down in the future. Someday.
Yeah.
We'll get there.
Yes.
I hope.
Well, I mean, do you guys remember that movie that was out a while ago? Everything Everywhere All at Once. Yeah, and I remember going to the cinemas and watching that with a friend and walking into it completely blind and having no idea what it was about. And it was crazy, it was wild, it was deep, it was funny, it was a roller coaster, but it was just really deeply philosophical about us and people and life and all that sort of stuff. And it's a story that I felt like could have been told by anybody, but I guess at the center of it, it was just a Chinese family. But that's what I loved about it, because it just so happened to be a Chinese family, but it was so relatable to everybody, because the themes that the show explored were so much more profound and deeper than what they were on the surface. Do you know what I mean? And they're the stories that I hope that we can keep telling, that regardless of who it is that we're seeing, we can have all these different people on screen being represented, but telling more profound stories than just what they are on the surface. Yeah.
Thank you for your answers. They're wonderful, and I hope that we get to see that future. And perfect. We have the last 15 minutes for audience Q&A. So raise your hand if you have, yes, right here. And sorry, someone's gonna bring you a mic.
Hi, I love this panel. It's hard not to take advantage that we're in Texas and we're about 5 blocks away from the Capitol. And I know you mentioned politics, but this is a state that just did SB 17, which has removed DEI in all higher education. And I see this pushback also with shows like the Gordita Chronicles getting canceled. So your thoughts about politics is, with immigrations, it's the #1 topic that people are voting on. And so what your perspective of the future with that, and especially this is on people's mind, and it's like, I guess, kind of scary for some people. Maybe that's why they're so concerned about immigration, even though it's been going down recently. So your just perspective about the politics of everything, especially being in the capital of Texas. Thanks.
Why are you making me sweat too? Like now, Dulce, no, you're making me like, why are you doing this to me? No, I'm kidding. But the two issues you just brought up, one is the DEI issue and the other one is immigration, obviously. The DEI issue to me is heartbreaking because I will point out that the imposter syndrome, right? This idea that we don't belong in spaces that we have ascended to because we've never seen ourselves represented in these spaces. The way I've always been able to combat that is by creating a sense of community and belonging. Because belonging is how you combat that and how you defeat that. So the idea to get rid of DEI and belonging initiatives is heartbreaking because now you're purposely excluding folks from being able to achieve what they're trying to achieve with their lives. That's my take. I apologize, Texas, with all due respect. And then the immigration issue. I mean, all of our work is focused on making sure that we're seeing as human beings first, because when you do that, you can't vilify somebody and you can't vilify a community, right? And I truly hope, and I've seen the studies that show, like when people watch and are represented with these type of human beings, they have a difficult time than voting for legislation that condemns these human beings. Does that make sense? So in fact, that's why I wanted to write my book, because I was so scared that Hollywood would not make my TV show that I wanted to make. So I wrote a book purposely so we can start healing from the previous presidency that had put us as scapegoats for what's going on in the world, right? And that was the way that I was trying to do it, through story. And I think, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate all of you. Brian, all you, buddy.
Vote Brian, president.
It's, I agree with everything Rafael said, and it is heartbreaking. Yeah, I think that's the importance of our medium. Like I said, how incredibly powerful that it is that we have to continue to tell our stories through a very authentic lens to hopefully build bridges of understanding, because political systems are changing, even the education systems are changing, and if we can push our medium to really tell these particular stories, hopefully we can then shift those systems in some way, but at least because our medium is so impactful to the larger, broader audience, create that sensibility, create that understanding within one another that we're all humans. And then I think at the Academies, there's the director of this Ukrainian film that won the Academy. And I hope I don't butcher his quote, but he said this beautiful thing that us as storytellers, now let me put this into the right verbiage. So as storytellers, right, we make stories. Stories create memories, and memories are our history. Something to that vein, but it was the most beautiful thing, and I was like, yes. So still continue to tell your authentic stories, because it can become the histories of the next generation. Wow.
Wow. Yeah.
Beautiful. Ukrainian director.
No, I mean, I can't really add to that. That was summarized pretty perfectly. I think it just starts with stories. Yeah.
We always say at Define American, politics are downstream from culture. We cannot change the politics of immigration until we change the culture in which immigrants are seen. Next question.
Hi, my name is Yumi. Obviously, the immigrant story is why we're here, but what do you think will create the transition from us only telling immigrant stories of first-gen immigrants or the children of immigrants to more stories of minorities? We say minorities, right? But we're the majority now. The stories of multi-generation Americans of other ethnicities. Like, what will create that catalysm? I might be using the wrong word, but that catalyst to remind folks that, like, even as immigrants, that doesn't mean we're not Americans.
That's actually, you answered your own question because you stated it so beautifully, because so much of the stuff that I gravitate to and I try to write deals with the underlying issue of what does it mean to be American, and who is allowed to say I'm American and I'm not. And I think you answered that's beautifully stated.
Yeah, I mean, those are the stories that I hope to tell. Those are the stories that I hope to see. Those are the stories that I want to be a part of moving this time forward and in the future. I feel that as we grow and learn from one another, I think generationally, right, we'll all get older, and the next generation will have a different sense and sensibility and understanding of who they are, their identity, and tell those stories. So it hopefully will also be a generation removed from the quote-unquote immigrant story, though we'll always have those. I think it's more of a push to try to identify the American story, try to identify with those particular situations of the Americana that we all exist in and we all can relate to. And those are the stories that I would love to be a part of.
I mean, there's so many ways to like share and tell stories these days, and a lot of the times we're always relying on big media productions and to go to the cinema and sit at home and watch these stream platforms to tell us what these stories should be that we're focusing on. But and I can't believe I'm saying this because I'm terrible at social media, but like there are amazing things that people are sharing on social media these days that give people a window into the lives of everyday people, that allows us to form a perspective on what these people are that we've never heard from before. And that's the great thing about that, is that we don't have to wait for these stories to be told back to us, that we can actually start telling our own stories to people by ourselves.
And it's also how we tell the story, because you're saying, how do we move beyond the immigrant story? But don't forget that The Godfather is one of the greatest American immigrant stories ever told, but told with such depth and authenticity and like tender and care. It's about how we tell the stories as well.
Thank you all so much for your perspective today. Mr. T, you had mentioned something about Margaret Cho. She was actually here a month ago and did an interview and talked about All American Girl. Yeah. And she talked about how those TV executives pushed back on her when she tried to bring her culture into those roles. So I wanted to know y'all's perspectives when you're in specific roles. How do you push back through and make it your own in terms of your own cultures?
Can we take a second to acknowledge that you grew up idolizing Mr. T, and now you're being called Mr. T in public? This is beautiful.
Right, which is it's so funny because when people say that it depends on the generation, they're like, Mr. T, and I was like, ah. And then they're like, what are you talking about? Like, never mind.
I love it. I love it. I love it.
Back to the question. Yes, Margaret Cho, the push that. I think as creatives, you definitely are given the opportunities to really try to push whatever culture you want into your storytelling. I think there are certain shows that are built upon, whether it's plot and or character that may not be your own, that you have to support as far as an actor is concerned. You're a piece of their story. I think in the stories that you want to tell, that the things that you can do specifically to yourself as an artist, you can bring in. And it could be subtle, it could be blatant, it could be, a part of a whole entire storyline. But what I impose is to continue to keep knocking on that door, keep asking the questions, keep pushing others to really try to tell full stories. Because there were glimpses of this in Chicago Med, not necessarily my character, but other characters. And immediately when they did, whether it was a particular type of food that they ate or whatever it was, you completely sunk into that character even more. You cared for them more, you related to them more.
And it was this very obvious thing that I feel some storytellers either are afraid of, don't want to get it wrong, but also can't really relate to or identify themselves within it because they didn't live in that perspective. But again, to keep continuing to knock on those doors and try to change minds in a particular way that they can, and then they may be able to see it once it's actually revealed. But what I want to impress on everyone is you have to keep knocking. You have to keep pushing, because don't say no for them. Don't sit back and say, no, let them do it. Or don't sit back and say, well, let me not ask the question because I don't want to get a bad answer. Make them say no, right? Put it in front of them, put the ideas in front of them and make them say no to you. And I think Margaret was a champion of that. I think that's why I adore her so much, is because even back then, right, she was in a completely different space, in a different world in society even, especially as an ethnic, what we call ourselves minorities, woman, right? And to be able to champion a show, to get on air, really try to push certain envelopes as far as telling her authentic truth is concerned, must have been excruciatingly hard, if not very scary. And I think from her trailblazing way, we've come to this point where it shouldn't be that scary. I think more and more people should be open to those ideas.
But the pushback is real. What we decide to produce and be involved in is very real. One of the best stories I ever heard was from one of my mentors, Edward James Olmos, who was in Stand and Deliver and Selena and all that good stuff. He was offered the role. Do you guys remember this movie called In the Line of Fire? Yes. With John Malkovich tries to kill the president of the United States. Clint Eastwood is there protecting him. He was offered the John Malkovich role, and he turned it down. And he turned down so much money because he just said, I don't want Americans seeing a Latino try to kill the president.
Wow.
So that's like the integrity that folks from historically marginalized communities have to wrestle with. Every time we're offered projects or writers' rooms to be involved in, you're like, is this the show that I need to be giving my time to?
Yeah. It's a hard thing to come across because the opportunities are there. You struggled so hard to get there. And for him to turn that down, gosh, is such a testament to him and his entire youth. Because we still live in a space where these tropes exist, the stereotypes exist. They continue on and on. And it's interesting kind of being in a position where I could finally say no.
Yeah, that's
right. Because starting out, like I talked about very earlier in this.
Did you find, Brian, you had to ever do did casting ever in your early career ask you to have to do an Asian accent?
Yeah. I was asked to do an Asian accent. It was very inappropriate.
Yeah. They wouldn't even adjust my Asian accent, and I'm like,
wait,
what? How do you know?
Wait a minute.
Like, you're not even Asian. Like, how do you know that my accent needs to be stronger or bigger? Yes, very much so. And I think most of, you can see here in my resume, the amount of accents that I had to do in order to be in this position to try to change the game into a different perspective. But I also feel like that the stories that we want to tell, I think it's really about what it is, the context of what it is. And I feel like accents are necessary in certain stories. It's just when they're blatant and completely unnecessary, I feel very tropey and stereotypical for that reason, is when you're like, we can do better. We can absolutely do better.
We can absolutely do better. That is all the time we have. Thank you so much. Thank you all.